But today we're just going to talk about how we print paper copies of contribution statements, or if we want to generate our own PDF files of contribution statements. But this is basically a paper contribution statement report that we're going to show you how to prepare today. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is to stop by the giving unit record, because there are some check boxes on the giving unit record that really pertain directly to printing contribution statements and determining which contribution statements we want to print. So I'm going to go down from my program menu, go to contributions, and I'll point out that I'm kind of old school in that I work off of the menus. If you work off of the toolbars, the icons, or the welcome window, certainly do that as well, but you'll see me in these webinars generally working off the menus. So program contributions, giving unit records. And so I'm going to bring up a giving unit that I know I have in here. My giving unit code is 108. Find. Okay, so here is Charles and Ruby Cook, and the three checkboxes on the information tab of the giving unit record that really come into play here are these that are right here under the name. For any giving unit, we can check this box on that says this giving unit should not receive a statement regardless. This might be a box you would check on if the donor is an organization or somebody that gets an acknowledgement for their gift in some other way, rather than receiving this end of year or these periodic quarterly or semi-annual reports of giving. But you can check that on to exclude any giving unit from receiving a contribution statement. You might also mark giving units as inactive, and inactive would mean it's really something that you would define. For example, if you have a donor recorded as a giving unit that has not given, say, in the last 2 or 3 years, then you might mark that giving unit inactive, but you would be the one that determines really what inactive means to you. The important thing is that you use a consistent definition. Finally, the checkbox, another checkbox on the giving unit record that you want to be attentive to is the checkbox to email statements. So if if your donors want to receive their contribution statement by email, then this box needs to be checked. Now that doesn't preclude them from receiving a paper statement as well, and we'll see when we get into the contribution statements how we do that. But if someone wants to receive an email statement, then this box needs to be checked. And again, the webinar that we're doing on Thursday at this same time will cover how to produce and distribute those email contribution statements. So those are 3 check boxes on the giving unit record that you might want to be attentive to and maybe give a quick review to before we get into the process of actually printing the contribution statements. I'm going to close my giving unit records here then. So the contribution statements are contribution reports. So to get to them, I'll use the reports menu, contribution reports, and these are all under statements and receipts. Now there are really 3 contribution statement reports that we'll want to pay attention to. There is the contribution statement line format, and we'll go over the difference between these two. It's a subtle but nice difference. The contribution statement report is a way to produce the contribution statement information in a form that you might use to review the information that's going to go out, but it will save paper, because whereas a contribution statement gets printed, starts a new page with every new donor, the contribution statement report doesn't. But to walk us through how to produce the contribution statements, I'm going to start with the contribution statements report. Then we'll take a quick look at the contribution statements line to see the difference between the two. And that's all I plan to cover today. So certainly won't require too much time, but if you have questions, again, don't hesitate to stop me. So I'm going to click on contribution statements and get that report window open. So this contribution statement report window looks like several of the other report windows in CDM Plus. You have your destination buttons here at the top, you have a sidebar, and depending on which tab I've chosen in the sidebar, what options I see here in this gray panel. We'll start on the search tab. This is how we start to say, okay, well, what are we producing contribution statements for? So first off, I'm going to do my contribution statements by contribution date. So my intent here is to produce my contribution statements for the year 2018. So you see I've got contribution date selected and the date range from January 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2018. Then I can choose to either include all of my giving funds on this report, or there may be a situation where I just want to use a few or exclude some of the giving funds from the report. So for example, if I just wanted to print contribution statements for the General Fund 2018, then I would choose Selected and choose that giving fund out of the checkbox. The same thing is true for events. Am I going to use all events, or am I going to use a selected event, for example, perhaps the Sunday morning worship service, to produce contribution statements? And all this is to filter down what are we wanting to include on the contribution statements, or what might we want to be excluding from the contribution statements. And again, payment types as well. I can include all of them, or I can choose the selected button and just choose, say I wanted to exclude stock or gift in kind contributions from the statements. I could just choose the other payment types. For purposes of our webinar, I'm going to include all of the payment types. I'm going to include all of the events, and I'm going to include all of the giving funds. So basically, my only search criteria here is that I'm going to just print contribution statements for January 1st to December 31st. I could also choose to exclude contributions from the statements that are above or below a certain range. So I could check the Use Ranges checkbox, click Configure to tell me that. So I might select the range of 100 to 500, and what this would say, because I have the total contribution button selected, if the total contribution is less than $100 or more than $500, then I'm excluding that from the report. I'm only including what is within this range. So for my top range, I might put a high number in there like $999,999. Again, I'm not going to use a range here, but we have that option. So that's my search criteria. What am I going to include in my contribution statements? Next down is the Report tab. So what order do I want to produce the contribution statements in? Do I want to produce them by name, by giving unit code? If you use pending codes, we can put them in that order, or I can put them in zip code order as well. For our purposes in this class, I'm going to sort the statements by giving unit name, and I'm going to have those in ascending order. I could choose to print a contribution statement just for a range of giving codes. This could be handy if I need to reprint a contribution statement for somebody. Then I could come in, I don't have to redo the whole list. I could type, again, I know that the cooks have giving unit code 108, so I could just type that range in, and I'm just going to print for them. I could also use the search icon here to the right, and that would open up my search. I can sort it by name, and I could do everything within that range of giving units as well. Yeah. I'm going to choose just to do giving unit 100 through 199. I can also ask the contribution statement to break down the statement into columns based on the various funds that I have. So I can choose giving funds from these lists. If I want to use those columns, I can choose selected. So for example, I may have a column for General Fund 2018. I may have a column for the Building Fund. I may have a column for missions. And I may have a column for memorials. So I can break this down by those funds as well. In the giving unit options, this is where some of those checkboxes on the giving unit record come into play. So for my giving unit options, I could choose to print the contribution statements only for those giving units that have made a pledge. So only if if I check this box on, then only giving units with a pledge would show up in the report. And also, what do I want to include? In this case, I've chosen to include in my contribution statements, in these paper contribution statements, those giving units that have been marked to receive an email statement. And that's by checking that box on. If I uncheck this box, then I'm not producing a paper statement for those giving units that have said they want to receive contribution statements by email. I'm going to leave that box checked for now. And let's go ahead. We've looked at several options now. I'm going to go ahead and click the refresh button, and let's see how this looks so far. Let's zoom in on it just a little bit. So there we go. Here is the giving statement for Charles and Ruby Cook. That was the giving unit that we looked at initially. And am I showing the date range on the report? And so here's where you can see for this contribution that they made on October 10th, we've broken down into columns: General Fund, Building Fund, Missions, Memorial. If there were gifts that did not fall into any of those 4 funds, that would show up under Other. We're showing a total. And you can see down here, we've totaled up by the fund name what was given, and we've separated out what's tax deductible and what's not. We'll scroll on down and see the Disney's. This has two contributions recorded on it. Again, things are broken out into columns. Totals by fund at the bottom. All of these are tax deductible. Notice that we've put a note down here: thank you for your faithful support of First Community Church. Looks like everybody that I chose to include on the report is doing tax deductible donations. If we had contributions that were marked as not being tax deductible, we would actually see 2 lines down here, one for tax deductible donations and one for non-tax deductible donations, and then a grand total for all of that as well. So we've covered the Search tab and the Report tab. Let's take a look at the Format tab. Let's start in the top left here under Print Options. You can see I've got check number and type checked, so we are including the check number and the payment type on the record. I've chosen to include memos over on the contribution maintenance window, where you can look at individual contributions, or where you enter the contribution in your batch contribution entry. This entry memo field. We also have the memorial and note field, but the entry memo field is what's referenced by memos here. So for this contribution from the Cooks, You can see that there's an entry memo that says sample entry memo. So I'm able to include that on the report, or I can choose not to put that information on the report. You see I uncheck that, and then that memo underneath the contribution went away. Same thing is true for notes. I can choose to include that memorial or note field on the report as well. Whether or not I want to print this date range on the report. Do I want to include that? If I don't, then I can uncheck print date range. And if I refresh, now you can see I've taken that off of the report. Address options is similar to other reports where am I choosing the primary, the alternate address, no address, or the address that's indicated where they currently are. I can print the address in all caps. What all do I want included in this header section that's here where the title is? And how do I want to align that? You can see I've chosen to align it center. What shows up in the footer, again, this is the same as the format tab for most all reports from CDM Plus. Do I want to produce totals by quarter? I can check that box on as well, and then just print detail for 1 quarter, or just print the totals. So you can see I have several different options on how to format this report. Get back and we'll refresh again. Page setup is where we set margins and paper size and orientation. The logo tab lets me put this logo on every contribution statement. That can be a handy feature. You need to have the logo in your graphic browser so that if I click select graphic, like if I were doing a notice, CDM Plus will open the graphic browser and let me choose the graphic that I'm going to use. Where do I want to position it? On the page center, I have it positioned in the top right. I have it scaled to 40% of its size. And then the shift is from the edge of the paper. You noticed the message on the report. So the message to somebody that has made gifts, you can see here's the text that's included here. So the text that goes onto your contribution statements is something that you determine. You put it in there. The language here around tax-deductible donations is specified here under the total descriptions, and non-tax deductible donations. Again, you can change that text to work in conjunction with the way you think and the way you talk and the way you work. Alignment has to do with these 2 pieces of information here, the return address for the organization and the address that the contribution statement is going to. So this is handy if you're going to be putting contribution statements into a windowed envelope, and make sure we can get this information aligned with the window. So the way this works, you can see that from the margins, this is not like the logo, which is from the edge of the paper, this is from the margins. Item A down here, 0.62 inches, what we're saying is that this organization address is offset 0.62 inches from the left-hand margin. So that margin is 0.5, so we're at a little more than 1 inch. Same thing, item B, if I needed to push the receiver's address over a little bit in order for the address to align with the window in my envelope, I could change that to 1. And then when I click refresh, I've pushed that over a little bit. Item C here is how far down does the recipient address go? So that space between the giving unit and organization addresses, and then how far down on the page does the detail begin, and that's what item D specifies. So that's contribution statements in a nutshell. I want to next go over to the contribution statement line report and show you what the difference is. Okay, well, let's go take a look at the contribution statement line report. Again, under reports, contribution reports, statements and receipts. So the contribution statements line report is really just like contribution statements with one difference. So again, I'm going to keep the same criteria that I had before. Notice here on the report tab, get back to contribution statements. On that report tab, we had these report columns that we could do. The difference between contribution statements and contribution statements line is that I don't have that columns box. So in this one, again, I'm going to select a few giving units to show. So I'm going to choose that, click refresh. Again, let's zoom it in. Notice now there's a column here called breakdown, where we used to have those columns on the contribution statement report. What contribution statements line does is a line item breakdown of the contribution this way. So you can see here on the second line, this contribution for June 24th, 2018, it's $150. $50 of it was for missions, and $100 of it was toward the building fund. Note also that on this particular report, the last time I did this, I had the box checked that said print only giving units with a pledge record. And on the Format tab, I asked CDM Plus to show me the pledge information on the report. And so now we've got a new section here at the bottom that shows not only the total contributions, but if there are pledge records involved for a particular fund, showing those as well. That's really everything I had hoped to cover with contribution statements. Again, I appreciate you joining me this afternoon for printing contribution statements. Hope to see you again in a future webinar, and I also hope you have a very good afternoon. So thank you so much for your time.